Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is American Truck Simulator. Let's rant with Scrapper. We are in the middle of a job. That's where we left off in the last episode. One of the things I do, I can't remember if I showed this in the last episode, but one of the things I do, if I have to stop in the middle of a job, I do not stop on the highway because when you start up again, it starts you in park or in neutral at a dead stop on the highway. Now, usually, I don't know if I've ever been rear-ended like that because usually it takes a little while for the cars to spawn in too. But just in order to avoid that kind of thing, what I do is what I've done here, and here we go. I stopped at a stoplight, right? And then this way it's red, and if there's anybody behind me, they're supposed to be stopped anyway. And then when we head forward, we will just pick it up again. So we're in the middle of a job we're delivering a frac tank to Alamosa in Colorado. All right, so that's where we're heading. And we've got about a 6 quote-unquote hour drive ahead of us. And it looks like we probably won't need to rest. 354 miles, so that'll probably be this episode. I don't know how long this episode's going to be because I have a rant planned, but I'm not entirely sure how long the rant will be. I know what I want to say, but I just don't know if it's going to take a long time to say it, so it might be good to have a shorter episode lined up anyway. So, and just so you can see, we still have 14,000 bucks, and here we go. I think actually we had been on the highway and we probably should have been able to continue on the highway, but we'll just follow the GPS. If it takes us through the scenic route or something, that's fine. Dude, you just ran a red light. That guy just ran a red light. So, what's the rant about today? So let me tell you a bit of a story and then we'll talk about the rant. There was a thread on Reddit or D&D Beyond. I think it was D&D Beyond. And in this thread, the game, it was in the Dungeon Master's forum, actually. And the Dungeon Master said, what do I do when I have a party with no healer? And this is a common sort of a motif that people from, and I don't know where this guy's from, but frequently people from massively multiplayer online games, World of Warcraft and games like that, they will frequently think that you have to play pencil and paper games the way you play a massively multiplayer online game. And MMOs have the so-called Trinity, the Holy Trinity, as it were. You have to have a healer, you have to have a tank, and you have to have DPS, right? And you don't in City of Heroes, and we've talked about that many times in my City of Heroes Let's Play, and you don't in D&D. You don't have to have a dedicated healer. You don't. It's not the same thing. You don't have taunt. You don't have aggro. It's not that way. It's being run by a human GM. It's being run in very slow. It's not run in real time and with combat where the like your hit points can go from full to zero in like 15 real seconds, and you don't have time to react. So somebody's got to heal you up. It doesn't work that way. So this GM has first the misconception that there has to be a dedicated healer in the party, and then second, he has the misconception that none of the players are capable of taking on a role of doing some healing. He said he has 2 sorcerers. I think it was like a fighter or something, maybe a rogue, and a bard in the party. So I looked at this, and I don't respond on D&D Beyond because I don't like them over there, the moderators, and I refuse to contribute to a badly moderated forum. But I looked at this, and I actually mentioned it to my friend on the Discord who does reply there. He was banned on multiple accounts, but he's got a new account there, and he's been replying to threads, and his attitude is, let's see how long it takes them to ban me again. But so what happens is when I see a post that I think he might be interested in, I'll copy it for him and link it in our Discord. So I linked this thing in the Discord and said, go read this. And so I looked at this and I said, well, first of all, you don't have to have a dedicated healer in a D&D party. But second of all, a bard is a perfectly serviceable healer. They get access to cure wounds, the same as a cleric does. They get access to healing word. So yeah, a bard can totally be a healer, and one of the ways I know that is that at the very beginning, when I was going to start 5th edition D&D, when my colleague was going to be the DM, and that never happened, and I was going to be a player. The players were like a sorcerer, a ranger, a fighter. The other characters, a fighter, and can't remember, a barbarian or something. And I wanted to play a bard, so I already was like, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and take healing stuff for this bard, right? I mean, I built her as a first level character, and let's see, am I going the right way here? I think so. Yeah. I built her as a first level character, and yeah, I took healing word, and my plan was at second level to take cure wounds. So, and I was going to take other buffing and recovery types of spells for the party, because I knew I was going to be, quote unquote, the only healing character. So what this GM was saying is I have to keep giving them healing potions because nobody can heal. And I said, well, first of all, the bard can heal, right? Why doesn't he know that? Over and above the fact that you don't have to do that. The players can figure it out, right? Fighters can heal themselves with various abilities depending on what subclass they pick, and sometimes monks and other characters can, and sorcerers might be able to. They'll find a way to deal with it, right? It's not your job to give them. I mean, it's okay to give them healing potions when healing potions should be present in the treasure, or if you want to have a potion shop and make healing potions available for them to buy, then that's on them. But apparently he just kept giving them healing potions in treasure as they were killing monsters so that they'd be able to heal, because they didn't have any way to heal. I don't know what they were doing about resting. So this friend of mine went onto the forum and said, first of all, as the GM, it's not your job to figure out how to heal the players. That's their job, the player characters. That's the player's job. It's your job to challenge them with monsters and traps and encounters and stuff. And he said, second of all, why doesn't the bard take some healing spells? And so the GM wrote back, and I don't remember what he said about the bard, but he said, like, the reason I keep getting them healing potions is I don't want any of the characters to die. Otherwise, the characters are going to die. So my friend wrote back and said, so what? Characters die. This is D&D, right? And then, of course, he was once again met, as he always is, with the objection, but that's no fun. From not so much this game master, I think, but other players on the forum said, but it isn't any fun when your character dies. And this GM is trying to prevent his players from not having any fun. And so my friend went on and he said, look, this is a role-playing game, and D&D, risk is on, like, death is on the table. That's the way D&D is. So somebody else came on who later claimed to have known and played at the table with Gary Gygax and Monty Cook and some of these old school guys, and Dave Arneson. Sure, right. I'm sure this person actually knew Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. Sure. But what he or she said, that this is what I want to talk about somewhat in the rant here, is that that not everybody wants to play a lethal game. And sometimes people just want to have fun going on adventures. They just want to have fun and go on adventures. That's what he said, or she said. And I read this and I thought, that's a catch-22. And this person doesn't seem to really understand, for all their claims that they played games with Gary Gygax, they don't seem to understand what an adventure is and what the purpose of role-playing games is. So I want to talk about fun versus adventures in role-playing games. That's what I want to talk about. That's sort of the topic. And so why did I look at that statement? I just want to have fun. We just want to have fun and go on adventures, and we don't want to risk character death to do it. Okay. Now, I mean, there are games where you don't risk character death. Champions is one. But having fun, going on adventures, and not having risk, yeah, that's not going to work. And the reason I say that is because if you look in the dictionary, Merriam-Webster online, go check it and look up the definition of adventure. Number one, the first definition, which is the most common one. It's the only one in my Webster's New Universal Unabridged Dictionary from the 90s. The definition of adventure is to do something that is risky or dangerous. To do something, to take an action, or to do something that is risky or dangerous. By definition, adventures are dangerous. They are risky. By definition. Okay? And so, what this guy's saying is, on the one hand, danger and risk aren't any fun because we might die. But on the other hand, is saying, but I want to go on adventures because adventures are fun. But adventures are dangerous and risky by definition. So how can you say, on the one hand, I don't want to be in any danger, and on the other hand, I want to go on adventures? Which is it? Do you want to be in danger or not? If you want to be in danger, then adventures, go for it. If you don't want to be in danger, you shouldn't, your character should stay in the castle and knit socks. Right? By definition, adventures are risky. Bilbo Baggins, I looked for it in The Hobbit today. I couldn't find the line where he says it, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but he says something like, when Gandalf in The Hobbit tries to get him to go on the adventure at first, Bilbo says that calls adventures nasty, uncomfortable things that make one late for dinner. And maybe do something else, like make one's feet wet and make one late for dinner or something like that. Adventures are probably not going to be fun for the player character. They're intensely fun for the player, but they're probably not going to be fun for the character. Right? I am sure J.R.R. Tolkien had a tremendous amount of fun writing about Bilbo Baggins' adventures in the barrels and with Gollum and in the Mirkwood Forest, but I'm quite certain that during most of that, Bilbo was miserable. And Tolkien even says by the end of it, Bilbo was quite miserable. He developed a cold and the sniffles and he was coughing and blah, 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 right? So it was fun for Tolkien to write about. But it wasn't necessarily fun for Bilbo to go through. It was scary, it was dangerous, it was nasty, uncomfortable business that made him miss dinner, let alone being late for dinner. And so, yeah, when you're sitting there saying, well, I want to have fun, but I don't want my character to be at any sort of risk, well, oh man, we should probably get gas here. Alright, so this is going to be awkward, but I'm going to stop here. Sorry about this, guys. This is not the right way to do this, but we'll block traffic for a minute. And I'm going to just turn around because I just realized I need gas. I'm going to go the wrong way through the gas station because nobody usually comes anyway. And all those cars are stuck behind me. This is, highly illegal. They're all beeping. Yeah, they're just going to have to go around because I got to get gas. And I forgot to do that. So I'll turn the engine off and fill up. And let's see, we'll go around this way. Yes, I should have noticed that earlier and come in the other way. But once you miss it, there's kind of nothing you can do. Alright, so now we're just going to come over here and pick it back up. Sorry, folks. Alright, and there we go. So there's this sort of contradiction, right? I don't want risk to my character because risk isn't fun, but adventures are fun. I want to go on adventures. Do you really know what you're asking for? Because adventures are supposed to be risky, dangerous, nasty, uncomfortable things that make you late for dinner. And not just make you late for dinner, they risk your life and limb, or the lives and limbs of your friends. Now, it can be objected, in Champions you don't risk life and limb, but there are plenty of other risks that make a Champion's adventure dangerous. You could have your secret identity revealed, and then that will cost you points. Right? Your dependent NPC could be killed, and that will cost you points. A guy who's hunting you could capture you and torture you, or brainwash you and force you to attack your own friends. Right? These are all risks. Our player's going to say, none of these are any fun. You can't do any of those to my character. We talked about this going all the way back to Nightmare Lass, right? Remember when we talked about how players were saying that it was like not fair for the GM to do like charm person or mind control to their character because they didn't consent to this stuff. Like, well, what are you playing the game for? This is all part of the game, right? There's a puppet power in Savage Worlds. It's a veteran level power. Once your character is veteran level, you're going to probably be facing NPCs, some of whom will have the puppet power. Yeah. And so they control you, and you have to do what they say. And that's all part of the role-playing game experience. It's part of the adventure, and it's one of the risks. So I guess what I wanted to talk about here is specifically that adventure equals risk. Adventure equals danger. And if you try to take the danger out of a role-playing game, then you're taking out the adventure. You're getting rid of the adventure part, right? Role-playing games are supposed to be, in their origin, this person knowing Gary Gygax notwithstanding, the whole definition of what a role-playing game was when they first started to come out was adventuring, right? You're role-playing being an adventurer, being a risk taker, being a danger seeker. Well, if there's no chance of losing life, limb, or friends, what's the risk that these people are undertaking when they're adventuring? Losing treasure? No. When monsters hit you, you don't drop weapons, usually, or gold. You're not losing money. You're not losing treasure. What's the risk? If not to life and limb, what else? In Champions, one of the reasons characters don't die, and by the way, Call of Cthulhu, as brutal as that game is considered, the primary way you lose your character in that game isn't death. It's insanity. Their sanity goes down to 0 and they become NPCs because they're no longer in control and they can no longer deal with reality, right? Their brain has been broken by the Cthulhu experiences that they're having. So in a game like Call of Cthulhu, the risk is more sanity than death. So you get 2 essentially health meters, mental and physical. You get hit points and you get sanity points. And you can lose them both and regain some of them both. And when either one of them goes down to 0, you're gone. And they're going to eventually go down to 0. That's the tragic irony, or whatever you want to call it, of Call of Cthulhu, that eventually those things will get worn down to 0 and you're going to lose your character, and that's just the way that game is. But there's another way to lose a character besides hit points, sanity points. In Champions, You can go unconscious without dying, and then having been knocked unconscious, you could be captured by the villain and thrown into a death trap or a danger room, or brainwashed to make it look like you're the villain or whatever. There's a consequence, and there's a mechanical ticker that is non-lethal. You can lose stun points instead of body points. In Call of Cthulhu, you can lose sanity points instead of health points. But in Dungeons and Dragons, there is no mechanical meter, no measurement stick, there's nothing mechanical in Dungeons and Dragons that you can lose the way you can lose hit points. Monsters can't do spell slots of damage to you. They can no longer drain your experience points the way they could in first edition, right? When you encountered a wraith or a specter, nobody was worried about losing hit points because they didn't do that many hit points of damage. But what they did was they drained your life and you lost a level of experience. You worked so hard to get up to 7th level that wraith hits you, you go down to 5th level. You've got to go earn those experience over again. But 5th edition doesn't do that because that's no fun. So the only thing a monster can really do to you mechanically that can eventually take a toll is hit points. There's no stunning. There's no fatigue like there is in Savage Worlds, which can incapacitate you but not kill you. There's no stun points like in Champions. There are no sanity points like in Call of Cthulhu. All you have are hit points. People have often complained that monsters are just bags of hit points, and all they do is do hit points, and they're boring. But why is that true? If you look at all the monsters in 5th edition and even the earlier editions, why is the bulk of what monsters do taking hit points away from characters? Because that's the only metric there is in Dungeons and Dragons to do any damage at all to the players. That's the danger. The danger to your character is encoded in one way, and only one way in D&D: hit points. So the only way I can make an adventure dangerous to you is to do hit points of damage to you. That's mechanically baked into D&D. What this one friend of mine said is, if you're going to say that characters can never die, why track hit points at all? If you're going to say they're never going to get to 0, you may as well not track them. Because unlike Savage Worlds, where every time you take a wound it makes you worse at whatever else you're doing, in Dungeons and Dragons, until you get to 0 hit points, taking hit points of damage has no effect. The only effect it has is to bring you closer to 0. It doesn't make you worse at anything you do. You're as effective at 1 hit point as at 101. So taking 25 hit points of damage to take you from 50 to 25 does nothing to your character except bring you closer to 0. So if you're going to say, but I don't want my character to go to 0, then you may as well not track hit points. Because the only thing hit points are there to do is bring you to 0. They don't do anything else. So this is another problem, right? At least in Savage Worlds, you can take fatigue as well as wounds and be knocked out from fatigue without chance of dying because it's just exhaustion, right? And then come back after the source of the fatigue is over and you have time to rest. Or you can take wounds, and a wound is sort of like 7 hit points of damage because most of the time damage to get past toughness on average, people have a toughness of 6 or so. So if you do 7 damage, you do a wound, right? You can take 3 wounds. So it's almost like you have 21 hit points. And every time you take 7 hit points of damage, essentially you take a wound. But the wounds give you negatives, right? So a 7 damage attack has an effect other than putting you on the ground. Before you get anywhere near the ground, when you just take that first wound, you're now at -1 to everything you do. It makes it harder for you to hit. It makes you run slower. Your pace is reduced. Everything is affected by that wound. Same thing with a fatigue. So it's possible for characters to risk becoming worse without dying. Because in Savage Worlds, you can become worse without dying. But in D&D, you can't become worse. You can either be perfectly fine and positive hit points or be dying. There's no, I'm wounded and I'm struggling to do this. Doesn't happen in D&D. So you're playing a game that's binary. You're either up and fine with positive hit points or you're at 0 and dying. There's nothing in between. And if you're going to say we can't ever be at 0 and dying, then you're never going to be at any sort of negative impact. So where's the risk? If we can't go to 0 hit points, what are you risking? When you're saying I want to go on to an adventure, I want to have an adventure that involves risk, but I don't want to die, what are you risking? What are you risking? I don't have the answer to that, because I don't think there is an answer. You're not risking anything if you're not risking death, because hit points are meaningless if you're not going to go to 0. Because it's the only thing hit points do. Hit points do something to you when they take you to 0. Anything beyond that, it doesn't do anything to you. So you're going to say we can't go to 0. You're saying we're not going to have risk. Literally, there's no mechanical way in the game for there to be, like, absent maybe fighting a rust monster and losing your favorite sword, right? And magical swords are hard for the rust monster to destroy anyway, and if it's a regular sword, who cares? You just buy another one for 30 gold, and you've got 500,000 gold because that's the way D&D is, right? And if it's a magic sword, it gets bonuses to resist being rusted. So I mean, unless you're fighting a rust monster that's going to destroy your armor and your weapons, what are you risking? And can you really have an adventure with no risk? Not according to the dictionary. According to the dictionary, risk and danger is what makes it an adventure. And so this is the dilemma here with D&D, is that the only way for there to be a risk is the risk of 0 hit points. There's nothing else in the game. There's almost nothing that takes your items away other than a rust monster or a gray ooze, right, which can sort of disintegrate, right, your armor. That's it, as far as I know. There's nothing that takes gold away. What else? There's nothing left that permanently drains your stats, right? If it drains stats, it comes back on a long rest or after a subsequent successful save on a long rest or something. So you might have to make a save every long rest to get your strength back or your intelligence or constitution back, but it's not permanent, right? And they don't drain levels, they don't drain stats, they don't drain skills or proficiency bonus or anything else. The only thing they can drain is hit points. And if you're going to say, well, you can't drain them past 0, why drain them at all? What's the danger? And how can you have an adventure with no danger? And this is the answer to why D&D has to be lethal in order to have risk, and a lot of these other games don't. Because all the other games have some other number that can be tracked besides death points, right? In Champions, you're tracking consciousness points, right? Stun. And unlike D&D, in Champions, you can be knocked unconscious without being dying. In D&D, you go to 0 hit points. You're now incapacitated. And you might be unconscious if you make your death saves. Or you might be dying and thus dead. So there isn't any way to track any non-lethal points. All hit points are lethality points, potentially. And whether they actually turn out to be lethal or not is really up to whether the player rolls a death save or not. And so when you have a game where the only thing that's tracked mechanically is something that can kill you, then the only risk there could be is death. If you don't want that risk, but you want there to still be adventure, still be danger, you need to play a different game, like Savage Worlds, or Champions, or Call of Cthulhu, where some stat other than straight lethality points is being tracked. Or where taking damage actually makes your character worse. When you lose sanity points and your sanity goes down, you're more likely to fail the next sanity roll because you have to roll under your sanity. So you have 60 sanity points and you lose 10, well, you go temporarily insane, but after you recover from that, you have 50 sanity points, and now you have to roll under a 50 in order not to go insane the next time. And if you go insane again, it drops to 45, something like that. You go temporarily insane again, and now you're at 45, and you only have a 45% chance to avoid going insane. And drops, and it drops, and it drops. In Savage Worlds, 1 wound, you're at -1. You take another wound, you're at -2. You take another wound, you're at -3. -3 to everything you do, including trying to soak the later wounds. So the first wound that you take makes it more likely you're going to be wounded again. And that makes it more likely you're going to be wounded again and incapacitated, potentially, right? Because your character is getting worse, right? And I know people say they hate the death spiral, right? It's a death spiral. Once things start going bad, they just keep getting worse and worse and worse. But that's the risk, right? In D&D, there is no risk of that. So a wound is a big deal in Savage Worlds. Crap, I took a wound. Fatigue is a big deal because it makes everything worse. In D&D, if you've got 21 hit points, 7 hit points is really no big deal. It's not a risk. The only risk is 0 hit points. So when you're thinking about whether you want to have adventures and have fun, keep in mind that the only way to go on an adventure is for there to be some kind of risk. And if you're playing a game where the only mechanical risk is death, 0 hit points, death saves is the only mechanical risk in the game, then in order to have adventures, you have to risk death. If you don't want to risk death and still have danger and risk, then you need to play a game that has something mechanical in it other than going to 0 and dying as a potential risk. Now, GMs can fudge this, right? You can make the risk be being ostracized by the community, banished by the king, and that's all potentially a narrative risk. But if you're talking about mechanical risks, the only way to have a mechanical risk without risk of death is to have some other kind of stat that you track. And D&D doesn't really have that. So if these guys are D&D players and they want to have adventures, then my friend was right. By definition, you have to risk death. And if you're saying we can't, then by definition what you're saying is I don't want to have adventures. So that's my rant about risk versus adventure. I believe in adventure, right? I'm the one. I think adventures are fun, and I think there should be risk. I don't think the risk always has to be death, but that's because I'm used to playing games that have risks other than losing hit points and dying as real potential risks in those games, right? We never had to worry about death in Champions because there were other risks. Okay, let's go ahead and get the XP bonus and park this, and then we will stop this episode. So feel free to leave comments, folks. What do you think about this? Is it possible to have fun without risk and still have an adventure, which is by definition a risky and dangerous undertaking? I feel like it isn't. And am I right that part of the problem is the fact that D&D has no non-lethal risk mechanics in it the way other games do? So let me know what you think, and post your comments below. Let's see how we did. And that should level us up. And it, got us close to level 9. And so we are going to, let's start doing fuel economy now because we pay for gas. So things are looking pretty good. We have 50,000, I almost said gold pieces. We have 50,000 bucks. If we take a look, do we have our, where's the garage thing? So let's take a look at the garage manager. Here we go. So we look at our Oklahoma City. That's our main garage. It's tiny size. We have 1 truck, 1 driver. You can see the profit, right? Our current profitability is $20,000 a day. So that's pretty good. And that has to do with the cost of the garage, the profits minus the cost of the garage and the truck, gas and everything. So we're doing really well. And what this says here is a fully equipped garage of this size is expected to earn this much money in a week. The bar shows how you're doing. So we're doing great. And eventually we're going to want to upgrade our garage, but it costs $150,000, I think, right? $180,000. So we got a ways to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to build up to $180,000, and then we're going to upgrade the garage, which will give us 2 additional slots, right? For additional drivers. And then what we're going to have to do is get like another $180,000 so we can get another truck to replace this one. We will then retire this truck to be used by our first hired driver, and then we will hire a driver to run that truck for us. And I tell you, one of the things I don't like about this game, and it will be so easy to do it, I don't know why they didn't allow us, is most of the drivers are called like Johnny B and Sandra S and Philip W, right? And I don't care about the last name, but it would be nice if we could change their first name. I would like to name the drivers in alphabetical order. The first one should start with an A, like Albert or, I don't know, Annette. They have both male and female drivers, so whatever. And then the second one would be a B, and the third one would be a C, so that I know how many drivers I've hired, right? And I'll have drivers like A, B, and C being one garage, and D, E, F, and G being in another garage, and it would help me organize things. Instead, what I'm probably going to do is male drivers and female drivers segregated by garages, so I know which garage is which, just so that I can keep it all straight in my head. But that's far into the future, folks. For now, we are all done with this episode. I hope you enjoyed the rant. Please leave me comments about whether you agree with me about risk versus adventure and fun. And until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been American Truck Simulator. Let's rant with Scrapper.